am an Ent, or that's what they call me. Yes, Ent is the word. The Ent I am, you might say, in your manner of speaking. Fangorn is my name according to some. Treebeard others make it. Treebeard will do.
Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today, as per your request through last week's poll, we are talking about the character history of the Ent Treebeard, or Fangorn as he was also known. I will of course put some related articles and videos in the description and cards, so please check those out. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Get yourself some Ent Draft and relax as we discuss the history of Treebeard. The story of Treebeard begins far back in the Elder Days, sometime during the Years of the Trees and likely before 1050. For he is considered to be the eldest of Ents, and in the Years of the Trees, Ents were created to shepherd and defend the forests by Yavanna when she learned of her husband Aule's dwarves. Thus, if Treebeard is called Eldest of Ents, he was first to be created and given Entish life by Yavanna, although other trees within Fangorn Forest were older than him, but no Ents were. His Sindarin name was Fangorn, and such was the name of his forest that he spent most of his life in, and it translates to mean beard tree or treebeard. Now, an interesting thought that I had while making this video is that if he and his forest share the same name, it's possible that other forests in Middle-earth had Ents that shared their names, but it is just speculation on my part. In fact, in the Elder Days of Middle-earth, when Treebeard could yet be considered young, the forests of Middle-earth were vast and wide indeed, and they were connected, but would be separated in later days, for the leaves of the woods that would later be named Lothlorien ran south, connecting to Fangorn, just as the western part of Fangorn connected in the north to the Old Forest, which found its way to the forests of Beleriand. He walked amongst the willow meads of Tesseranon, or Nantathrin, the pine trees of Dorthonion, the beeches of Naldoreth, and the elf woods of Osiriand. I imagine he walked in the Old Forest at some point as well. And eventually Treebeard came to dwell permanently in the Fangorn Forest. Concerning Treebeard himself, he, like many other Ents, were taught to speak by the elves of ancient times, thus he learned Elvish, but would go on to learn the Common Tongue and Entish as well. He was 14 feet or 4.2 meters tall, and had a gray beard, with brown eyes that had a green light about them. According to a Reddit post linked in the description, it seems as though he most resembled a beech or oak tree, being ancient and strong. Something interesting I should note here is the similar nature of Treebeard and Tom Bombadil, for they are both remarked as being the eldest creatures in Middle-earth, and they are also the masters of their forests, and are rather enigmatic in nature. Treebeard is also interested when he learns of Tom. It is rather interesting. Now, on with his history. Treebeard would eventually marry an Ent-wife named Fimbrithil, but as it was with all the Ent-wives, the Ents would like the deeper parts of the forest, and the Ent-wives wanted to go further towards the eaves or out of the woods to plant and manage their gardens. And so Fimbrithil eventually left Treebeard, much to his lamenting sorrow during The Lord of the Rings, for the Ent-wives became lost to the Ents at large. What became of her, Treebeard would never discover. And so Treebeard continued to dwell in his forest of Fangorn, even after the destruction of Beleriand and the other forests in which he wandered in the far west, and he made one of his homes Wellinghall, in the flanks of Mount Methedras. A stream of the river Entwash fell across the entrance to his hall, and behind it was some bits of furniture, a table and a great bed for Treebeard. As the ages went on, some of the elves would know of and remember Treebeard, as well as the wizards Gandalf and Saruman, for Saruman of course would come to dwell in Isengard, and would be a neighbor of the Ents of Fangorn. Celeborn would note the danger of the forest to the Fellowship of the Ring before they went south, just as Treebeard might have said of Lothlorien if the Fellowship had been going the opposite way. Treebeard and his Ents were good of nature, of course, but even in the Elder Days, Ents had fought dwarves in the Battle of Sarn Athrad, and certainly men had felled many trees that had once been the friends of the Ents in the days since. So it can be said that Ents and the Free Peoples didn't always see eye to eye, and Treebeard was certainly chief among them. The stories of such creatures were told to the children of the Rohirrim, and they were thought to be no more than tall tales by the time of the late Third Age. They kept to themselves as much as they could. Indeed, the War of the Ring came to Fangorn itself, in 3019 of the Third Age, for the Uruk-hai of Saruman were beset and slain by the Rohirrim on the eaves of the forest, and their captive hobbits escaped into the trees. Before this, Treebeard had been aware of strange goings-on, having seen Gandalf the White in his forest not long before that, and he was also aware of Saruman and his orcs felling the trees of his realm. Thus, the coming of Merry and Pippin of the Shirefolk was indeed like the first falling of stones that begins an avalanche. Upon a rocky outlook in the forest, Treebeard first encountered the hobbits, and he was suspicious of these Shirefolk, for they were not in the old poems and songs of the Free Peoples. But Treebeard and his new friends would soon change that and add in a verse about hobbits. They would discuss much, some of which would concern the forests of the Elder Days, and they would eventually come to Welling Hall. There they rested and spoke, and the hobbits enjoyed some of the Entish draught that Treebeard made, which gave a refreshing smell of a wood borne by a cool night breeze. They would speak of the hobbits' adventure so far, and Treebeard was fascinated by it all, and they would also talk of the Ent-wives and if the hobbits had seen any, and then the conversation turned to Saruman. While Treebeard is typically slow and calm, the subject of Saruman and his treachery made him positively hasty indeed. He would call forth an Entmoot, a meeting of the different Ents of Fangorn, but that would be later, after they slept. In the morning, the hobbits enjoyed an earthier and more hearty Ent draught for breakfast, and then they were off to call the Entmoot. These Ent draughts would make Merry and Pippin tall. After Welling Hall, they went to the hollow of Durndinkel, where the Ents called their moot. Treebeard had a hastier Ent, Quickbeam, watch over the hobbits while the other Ents, speaking in Entish, took days making up their minds concerning whether or not they should do something about Saruman. But in the end, they decided to go to war with Isengard and Saruman after all, for a wizard should know better than to do what Saruman did to the trees. Singing their marching song, the Ents, led by Treebeard, who bore Merry and Pippin, went to Isengard and began tearing at the walls and redirecting the flow of the river Isen. During the Battle of Isengard, the Ents completely defeated Saruman, for he had not expected this attack, and though the Wizard of Many Colors was locked in his tower, Treebeard would make him stay there. During the battle, Gandalf would ride to ask Treebeard to send some Huorns to Helm's Deep to aid the defenders there, and Treebeard did just that. After the battle, Treebeard took over the management of Isengard, and made Merry and Pippin the door wardens of Orthanc. Wormtongue, who had ridden from Edoras, came amongst the destruction, and Treebeard, knowing the evil man for what he was, forced him into the tower with his master. Gandalf, along with the King of Rohan and other friends, would come to Isengard after its devastation to speak with Saruman, and Treebeard would attend this meeting, and, at the bidding of Gandalf, would afterwards keep Saruman locked in his tower. Treebeard was glad to meet an elf, and bewildered to see the friendship Legolas had with Gimli the dwarf, and he gave them leave to explore his forest when the war was done, and they would eventually do just that. And so Treebeard and the other Ents watched over Isengard in the coming months, tearing down the walls and industry so that growth and nature would return there. Orthanc remained, however, for it could not be torn asunder, and Treebeard kept Saruman informed with long-winded tales and news that sounded ill to the wizard, even as the rest of Saruman's orcs were slain by the Ents and Huorns of the forest. This new forest in the former ring of Isengard would be called Watchwood. At last, Saruman had grown weary and hasty, and awoke a kind of pity in Treebeard. Thus Treebeard, not wishing to see anything imprisoned, not even an evil being, allowed Saruman and his servant Wormtongue to leave Isengard in August of 3019, so long as they locked the tower and surrendered the Key of Orthanc. When Gandalf, King Elisar of Gondor, the Ring-Bearer, and many others including elves came to Orthanc not long after, Gandalf was troubled, for he knew Saruman could still cause harm. But Quickbeam surrendered the keys of Orthanc to King Elisar once more, and Aragorn would declare the Treegarth of Orthanc to be an Entish realm. Aragorn hoped that the Ents would endure and find their Ent-wives, and create new Entings now that lands to the east were open to them, but Treebeard shook his head, knowing that too many men were in Middle-earth, and likely the time of the Ents would come to its end. Treebeard spoke to Celeborn and Galadriel, bidding them farewell forever, as it had been long since they had seen each other, and Treebeard could feel the world was changing, and he did not think that they would meet again. Celeborn was unsure, but Galadriel said they would not meet again in Middle-earth, nor until the lands of Beleriand were raised up out of the water, and then they would meet in the willow meads of Tessaranan in spring. And so it was that Treebeard bade the heroes of the West farewell, not the least Merry and Pippin, who shared more Ent draught with him, and just as before, grew even taller. Treebeard bade them send word if they ever encountered any Ent-wives. Whither he went afterwards I am unsure. Likely he stayed in the Treegarth for some time, but perhaps Treebeard sought for Fimberthil again, or he lingered in the woods of Fangorn until he became tree-ish, preserving the days of old in the forest itself. And mayhaps, before the end of their lives, Merry and Pippin did visit him again. Thus, we come to the end of our tale about Treebeard, the Eldest of Ents. From the tale of Treebeard, we see that we should measure haste against the values of our hearts, and so when we take action, we see that we take the right course in due time. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections on Treebeard? Let me know in the comments below. Treebeard is such an interesting character and a love letter to nature, and I quite enjoy his measured wisdom in the story. Shout out to my dad. I know Treebeard is one of his favorite characters. I love you, and I couldn't do it without you. I want to shout out our Valar tier patrons: Adrian De la Torre, Chris Ortner, Peter Sheppard, Jonathan Putnam, Mark Kralik, Blair Scout and Tobias Goldner, Merton, John Hume, Tom Bombadil, Reggie93, Jennifer Wood, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Quantum Catalyst, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Ben Gardner, and Kondar. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all of my patrons. It means a lot. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on the clans of men. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.